The Outlaw's Journey by Eugene Mathena. In the early spring of 1881, the rolling hills of southwestern Virginia were awakening from the chill of winter. News had spread like wildfire through the towns and valleys. Jesse James was on the run. Having narrowly escaped capture in Missouri, the notorious outlaw was making his way eastward, a ghost on horseback, seeking refuge among the secluded Appalachian foothills. One late afternoon, Jesse rode into the small town of Bedford, his silhouette a dark contrast against the sun-drenched sky. Tethering his horse outside a bustling saloon, he took a moment to adjust the brim of his hat, concealing his identity. The local watering hole, the Old Oak Saloon, was filled with the laughter and chatter of townsfolk unwinding after a long day. As Jesse pushed open the creaky door, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations paused, and all eyes turned toward the newcomer. The bartender, a burly man with a thick mustache, raised an eyebrow but didn't say a word. Jesse, exuding an air of confidence, approached the bar. "Whiskey," he ordered, his voice steady but low. The bartender poured a shot and slid it across the bar. "What brings a man like you to Bedford?" he asked, attempting to break the tension. "Just passing through," Jesse replied, glancing at the other patrons, who were eyeing him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You got a quiet place for a man to rest his bones?" A tall, rugged man leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Ain't no place in Bedford quieter than this saloon, unless you count the church on Sundays. But you don't seem like the church-going type." Jesse chuckled, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Guess you could say I prefer the company of outlaws over saints." The laughter erupted from the crowd, easing the tension. "Well, if you're looking for trouble, you might want to keep moving," another patron chimed in, clinking his glass. "We've got enough of our own without inviting more." Jesse, ever the smooth talker, replied, "Ain't looking for trouble, just a place to rest my head for the night." After finishing his drink, Jesse slipped a couple of coins onto the bar and prepared to leave. "Take care, gentlemen. I hope to see you all again someday, under better circumstances." With that, he walked out, his mind already plotting the next leg of his journey. As he rode westward, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape. He passed through a small budding railroad town known as Martin's Tank, where the whistle of the steam engine echoed through the air. The townsfolk bustled about, unaware of the infamous outlaw among them. Jesse decided to keep a low profile, slipping into a general store to gather supplies. "Got any fresh bread?" he asked the shopkeeper, who eyed him warily. "Sure do, but I don't take kindly to strangers," the shopkeeper replied, sizing him up. Confederate veteran and blacksmith Captain Charles Teeney, standing alongside the shopkeeper, sensing Jesse's character, interjected, "I think he's one of our boys, Jedediah." "He's okay. He wore the gray." "Just a man in need," Jesse said, flashing a charming smile. "I've been traveling a long way." The shopkeeper hesitated but then nodded, handing over a loaf. "That'll be 50 cents. And if you're looking for a place to lay low, there's a barn behind the old mill. Just watch your back." "Appreciate the tip," Jesse said, tipping his hat before making his exit. With nightfall approaching, he found the barn and settled in for a night. Heading off the next morning towards a small town called Hillsville, evading capture while the law hunted him down. Hillsville, with its remote location, became his temporary hideout. The townspeople kept to themselves, whispering rumors of the outlaw who had taken refuge among them. One evening, while seated in the dim light of the hotel, Jesse reflected on his life choices. A young boy, curious and wide-eyed, peeked in his room as his door was unlocked. "Are you Jesse James?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Depends on who's asking," Jesse replied, a smile playing on his lips. "I heard you're a hero," the boy said. "Maybe to some, but heroes get caught eventually," he replied, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. "You best forget you saw me, kid, and my name is Thomas Howard." As the weeks passed, the pressure mounted. News of his presence leaked, and the law closed in. With no choice left, Jesse decided to head toward Tennessee, with plans to ultimately return to Missouri. Months later, in April 1882, Jesse was back in his home state, his notoriety casting a long shadow over his every move. He was living under an alias, trying to lay low, but the tension was palpable. Betrayal lingered in the air like a heavy fog. On April 3rd, in a small home in St. Joseph, Missouri, Jesse was preparing for yet another move. Mrs. James poured the coffee and took her seat at one end of the table. Jesse spread the newspaper in front of him and began reading the headlines. Suddenly, he said, "Hello, look at this. The surrender of Dick Liddell." He glanced at Bob Ford with a sharp look in his eyes. "Young man, I thought you told me you didn't know that Dick Liddell had surrendered," he said. Ford replied, "I didn't know." "Well," he said, "it's strange. He surrendered 3 weeks ago, and you were right in the neighborhood. It looks suspicious." Jesse kept staring at Ford, and he felt uneasy. Bob got up and went into the front room. A minute later, he heard Jesse push his chair back and walk to the door. He came in with a smile and said, "Well, Bob, it's all right." Suddenly, it hit Bob, his true intentions. Bob hadn't fooled him at all. He was too smart for that. Jesse knew that Bob was there to betray him, but he wasn't going to kill him in front of his wife and children. He walked over to the bed and deliberately unbuckled his gun belt, which held 4 revolvers, and tossed it onto the bed. It was the first time Bob had ever seen him without his belt, and he realized he did it to make him feel more at ease. Jesse acted like he wanted to keep busy to brush off what had happened at the breakfast table. He pointed to a picture on the wall and said, "That picture is awfully dusty." Bob didn't see a speck of dust on it, but he stood a chair beneath the picture, climbed on it, and started dusting. As Bob sat there, he realized this was his moment. Jesse stood unarmed with his back to him, and he thought, now or never. If I don't act now, he'll get me tonight. Without hesitation, Bob drew his revolver. Jesse heard the hammer click as he cocked it, and he began to turn just as Bob pulled the trigger. The bullet struck him behind the ear, and he fell dead like a log. And just like that, the outlaw who had roamed the hills and valleys, evaded lawmen, and captivated the imaginations of many met his end, not in a blaze of glory, but by the hand of a man he had once called a friend,